Welcome to the latest ChapmanCG HR Spotlight presentation, Spotlight on HR in LatAm. If you are watching a Spotlight presentation for the first time, we will be sharing the key HR trends and perspectives for Latin America HR over the next 25 minutes. Our aim is to give new HR leaders to the region a snapshot of the key topics, plus share our thoughts on emerging trends for those more familiar with LatAm. My name is Ben Davis, and I'm a member of our executive leadership team and co-lead of ChapmanCG on a day-to-day basis. ChapmanCG is a global executive search firm solely focused on the HR profession, with over 90 employees around the world. As a result, we are talking to global, regional and country HR leaders and their function counterparts on a daily basis. Using these conversations and our executive search experience, we are uniquely positioned to share the reality of market trends for the HR function. ChapmanCG has been working in the LatAm region on HR leadership searches to find the best HR talent since around 2012, and it remains a challenging and complex market for a range of reasons. Our presenters today are Stephanie Cross-Wilson, President and Co-Global Head of ChapmanCG, who leads the ChapmanCG Americas business. Stephanie has spent over 20 years in executive search, having lived and worked in Australia, Hong Kong and Singapore before Los Angeles, where she is based today. Stephanie will be joined by Alan Mate, a director with the Americas team based in Las Vegas. Alan has lived and worked in London and Hong Kong before the US. Alan has recently worked on senior HR assignments in Brazil, Mexico and Chile. Tim Rayner will also join the group and present. Tim is a senior director with the EMEA team based in Spain who has worked extensively across LatAm utilizing his Spanish language skills and global relationships with clients in EMEA, supporting their executive HR hiring in LatAm. Stephanie, I will hand over to you for the agenda of today's presentation.
Thank you, Ben. For our agenda today, we're going to provide a brief overview of the region. Then we'll go on to discuss how companies are entering the Latin America region and where they're establishing their key hubs. We'll briefly review some key HR trends. We'll discuss how we're working with Latin America HR talent, and then finally we'll finish with a review of the different HR specializations. Overall, it's hard to look at Latin America as one geography. It's a very complex topic. So what we're going to try and provide for you today is a broad overview from an HR perspective. Firstly, just to start with the definition, we'll be speaking about Latin America in the broadest sense today, as it's defined by language and culture. So we will be including Mexico, as well as the whole of Central and South America, and many of the Caribbean islands. For HR, the main regional hubs are Brazil, Argentina, and Mexico. The United States is a third or fourth largest hub in terms of Latin America, and we're also seeing that Colombia and Chile are becoming very important as HR locations. Versus other regions, notably Asia, it's a real plus in Latin America to have a commonality of language. So despite its complexity, it does make doing business slightly easier than in some other regions, acknowledging that Brazil is a partial exception given the national language is Portuguese. We're seeing that over the last 10 years, the region's developed at a good pace for the HR profession. However, the last 2 years have generally been a period of stagnation, largely due to political and economic factors. Today, we are seeing a strong focus in some countries on improving the application of employment laws and in driving compliance. There is a real effort going on now for countries to become more business friendly, and they're, as a result, attracting interest and investment from multinationals. We're seeing a growing contrast between countries which are trying to look outwards and do business with multinationals versus those which are very preoccupied with what's going on within their countries. Chile and Argentina notably are receiving praise from the global HR community for their outward focus and their desire to do business globally. They're taking a real proactive approach to addressing global compliance issues, which multinationals are finding helpful Both countries are fundamentally attractive anyway to multinationals due to their high availability of talent, their high adult literacy levels, and so on. We're seeing that Chile is expanding beyond its traditional mining and natural resources industries and attracting investment more broadly. And we're seeing that Argentina, which has been very troubled over the past few years, is making a real concerted effort to resume its past position on the global stage. Brazil and Mexico, on the other hand, are two very attractive geographies for multinationals. We've heard from HR leaders that they are growing slightly more difficult in terms of employment conditions, regulations, and cost. Nonetheless, both remain important, very important regional centers. And other countries overall are pretty variable in terms of, basic sanitation issues such as personal safety, as well as the more operational challenges and the ease of growing and running a business and hiring people within their countries. We're now going to make some brief points on how companies are entering Latin America. Some are taking a full boots on the street approach and they've set up their headquarters within the region. Others are still hubbing the region either in the United States or Europe, and we'll look at the contrast of both. Many multinationals are still hubbing Latin America out of the United States, especially in Miami. And we're also seeing others running their Latin America HR functions out of Europe due to the language commonality. For some organizations, a hub outside of the region is viewed as less risky given geopolitical instability, currency volatility, and personal safety issues. Those that are more fully invested in local geographies are taking the longer view to the region while trying to manage risk in the interim. One trend that we are seeing in HR, interestingly, is that while some of the major economies are slow, notably Brazil, forward-thinking multinationals are taking the opportunity to upgrade the HR talent that they have. So while they're not adding headcount, they're trading up the quality of their HR leadership while it's very affordable to do so. Longer term, as we saw with the Asia region, companies by and large do want to mature to the point where they can be managed from the region and by the region. Due to some of the factors that we've discussed, though, this is taking time for Latin America, and it's been particularly slow over the last couple of years, but eventually we do see this as the overall direction for the region. I'd now like to introduce Alan Mate, who's going to cover some of the key HR trends that we're seeing.
Thank you, Stephanie. What's important when we're looking at HR trends across the region is to kind of look at everything through the lens of a sort of socio-economic and geographical realities which affect the location and effectiveness of HR centres in the region. In particular, and against the backdrop of sort of tighter budgets and economic reality, there has been a collapsing of regional and country head roles. And what I mean by that is often the regional HR head holds dual responsibility for HR leadership of his or her country and a sub-region. And so there is sort of more oversight from a single individual. And where there are country heads, that's generally reserved for some of the larger economies in the region, namely Brazil and Argentina. Now, there has been a steady increase of regional HR lead roles in Colombia and Mexico, and we think that's largely in part to their ease of access to the US, both in terms of proximity and flight connections, in addition to more favorable current economic situations in those countries, as well as improved talent base. In Colombia, there's recent increase in commercial consumption, and the increase in living standards is noticeable. We're hearing that quite a lot, and it's very evident, people on the street just seeing the effects of an improved economic situation. Now, there is a growing hesitation about Brazil, which has always been the sort of regional powerhouse, but there are concerns with corruption and the unfavorable levels of regulatory and government control on HR initiatives, which makes it somewhat a less of an attractive proposition moving forward. However, we are seeing an increased level of investment from European companies. And we tend to see that more at the sort of small to medium-sized companies in Brazil who represent a good opportunity to step into the market. So although Brazil going through some difficult times, it's still one of the powerhouses in that part of the world. Now it is becoming increasingly important as LatAm develops gets more of a seat at the decision-making table to invest in those regions and to try and bring home top talent from international markets in the US and Europe. And the reason being is to really kind of bring back leaders who know what good looks like, who can bring back a global mindset to a particular country or region. Now, the challenge, of course, is enticing that top talent back to the region. And the main challenges we're sort of seeing in regard to that are compensation and benefits and career development opportunities for those individuals once they land. Now, the recent economic downturn, current volatility across all markets has caused, as is evident, high potential HR talent to look for opportunities outside of Latin America. Now, this is not only for career opportunities. Many professionals are looking to make permanent moves to international markets, citing improved education opportunities and safety concerns for their families. So there's definitely a lot of key elements at play here. Now, HR professionals will often move out of the region, interestingly enough, rather than intra-region. So it's actually quite rare to see rotational HR programs from country to country within Latin America. And I think one of the major reasons is the view of HR still is seen as a non-critical support function. And so when we're looking at the financial realities of moving people around, which can be pretty costly, these moves generally are reserved for commercial or operations business leaders rather than HR at present. But for expatriates, it's a market which is exciting, and we sort of look at Asia a number of years ago and the investment of expatriates into that part of the world. There's a lot of challenge in Latin America which mirrors that. So expats are kind of looking at the opportunity to step into the region and gain a good sort of 2 or 3 years experience, which can be fantastic to develop one's resume. The challenges lie really in what happens next. So it's a great opportunity for a senior HR leader to come in, fix structures, good processes and policies in place, but when they leave, what happens to those policies? So it's very important to ensure a good succession plan and talent development strategies and ensuring that those standards do not drop when that expat departs. Given the cultural differences from country to country, expats from outside of the region can sometimes actually be an easier option and find it easier to assimilate versus expatriates from countries within Latin America. Now, it's important if you are going to bring in an expatriate and entice them into the region, what is that enticement? And it's often, we found, giving that person the ability to be close to the business so that they can feel part of the region, part of the culture, and make a real difference to business performance. So it's really assimilating on many different levels. Now, rather than sticking the expat on top of the HR structure, what we've actually found and what we've heard works really well is to actually bring in an expat at the number 2 or number 3 level, but not putting them in the number 1 role. So it's almost a sort of shadow for a local leader. And that's kind of successful in the sense that we're seeing best practice come through, but it's coming through top down from a local hire rather than be seeing coming from outside of the region. And that just builds up trust and confidence in that market. But of course, key challenges for the region remain attraction and retention issues, which are no different to any other part of the world, but they're really kind of raising their head in LatAm because with the increased demand for skills professionals, and that's only going to increase, we're still kind of facing talent supply bottlenecks, which by and large have been unresolved in many countries. So I think moving forward, attraction and retention are going to be paramount in any HR discussion. What is interesting to note, though, is that in that part of the world, the same challenges are being faced by HR leaders, in particular in relation to talent. So leadership development, organizational design and effectiveness, engagement, culture, learning. These are the key factors that are top of mind with many HR leaders in HR discussions, and that is, as I mentioned, reflective of anywhere in the world. So it's good to see that these discussions are being had and that the region is aware of the challenges moving forward. I'd like to introduce now my colleague Tim Rayner, who is going to walk through working with Latin American talent in HR.
Thank you, Alan. Mobility and the desire for it among Latin American HR professionals is high. Compensation differences and immigration requirements can complicate mobility across the region, although there is an increasing amount of mobility and hunger for experience in North America, Europe and Asia, as Alan highlighted earlier. There is a thirst for personal and career development. Many professionals will go to where the jobs are and maintain two living arrangements. Culturally, it's a relatively open-minded region. Prospective talent for searchers tend to be responsive and interested in hearing about opportunities. There are often high candidate expectations of overall responsibility and salary package. Brazil is particularly well known for this, where a 20% pay increase to move is a common minimum expectation, even in today's economic climate. As with most countries, the better talent tends to have longer career longevity. However, given economic difficulties, many candidates' moves have been forced, and allowances should be made for this. Diversity in Latin America tends to mean gender. Good equality in HR, with senior leaders increasingly being female. Most sought-after qualities are business experience, understanding the commercial mindedness, the ability to connect locally and manage in a matrix and international environment, and probably most importantly, the ability to scale an HR function and appropriately its HR processes. Creating comprehensive, multifaceted and flexible reward strategies specifically for Latin American professionals can be of great long-term benefit. Whilst LTIs and shares are of less interest in Latin America compared to the US and also Europe, in Latin America the family-friendly allowances and benefits should be a core element of reward strategy. The socio-economic issues in many countries have had a profound impact. Many employees have seen multiple large-scale restructurings. Low-cost people have been put into critical roles in some cases. Forward-thinking companies are now considering how this will be managed when the markets improve and how to position for this growth. Filling skill backs is critical. How to engage with talent differently and ensure the necessary retention rates is an ongoing challenge. And we're seeing companies really trying to balance the communication of now versus future unknown needs in an open and honest dialogue as possible. I shall hand over to my colleague Alan Mate to talk about HR specializations.
Thank you, Tim. So what we wanted to do now is just go into a bit more detail around some of the key areas within HR, specifically a number of areas across the COE constructs, HR generalists, business managers and HR operations, to give a bit of an insight into what we're hearing from the market in terms of trends and needs. So if we first of all look at HR operations, now HR shared service centers and HR outsourcing centers have grown in Latin America as companies seek to reduce costs, increase operational efficiency and improve overall services. But as expected, there's no perfect location for that hub or set of hubs. Costa Rica has been popular in the past, but it has a small talent base, and the market has not really been able to keep up with the demands of major multinationals. Brazil is an interesting one to look at. Now, servicing Brazil from outside the country can be quite difficult due to regulatory demands. So some companies actually have a dual centers. So they'll have one center inside of Brazil and one center outside of the Brazil. Now, cost is also a problem in Brazil, and the language barrier, it really kind of drives that, with Brazil obviously speaking Portuguese and the remaining countries across LatAm largely speaking Spanish. So it does mean that there are some nuances there if you're going to be looking at Brazil as a potential option. That also then can increase costs and complexity. Now, what we've seen is that popular HR center locations increasingly will be looking at Argentina, Mexico, Colombia, and Panama. Now, interestingly enough, I think the final two, Colombia and Panama, we're probably seeing more and more investment moving forward. Interestingly enough, looking at the nature of HR generalists and HR business partners, it's been quite interesting to dissect by country. And I think this needs to be looked at really again through somewhat of a socio-economic lens, just to see how these functions have evolved. Now, Brazilian HR leads often came from heavy unionized employee relations backgrounds, so very strong in compliance. Now, today we are seeing HR leaders evolve through development areas such as talent management, learning, and talent acquisition. However, poor economy and lack of investment in Brazil talent these last 2 or 3 years means that we'll probably still see a gap in the ability for the traditional Brazilian HR leads to have that broader skill set. Interestingly enough, Argentina is actually a bit of a reverse from that. So we've typically seen people come through into HR generalist roles from those development functions. What that has meant, unfortunately, is there is a big gap in talent as regards employee and union relations, and there are struggles in the country, as a result of that. And I think the market there is moving, as are most countries across LatAm, to more of a rigorous compliance-focused employment framework. There's still a lot of work to be done in that regard, though. We have seen the evolution of the HR business partner over the years, and it's really been focused around 2 particular countries, and that's Mexico and Colombia. And we look at that and we think, well, why? Why would that be the case? And it's really an increase of US influence in those countries, both from a commercial and a language perspective, that's really kind of driven the HR business partner to want to be closer to the business, to see the commercial realities of an organization. Now, Mexico HR also has a very strong expertise in labor and employee relations, largely due to the large manufacturing landscape that's there, and that's ever increasing, particularly within the automotive sectors. But there is less regional expertise in that market, and so we haven't traditionally seen large regional HR heads in Mexico. That is changing, and I think we'll probably start to see more of an investment in that country in that regard too. Chile is a very interesting market, and outside of mining, multinationals have not had significant regional operations historically. The HR professionals there tend to be more domestic focused, with country heads managing small teams, and small teams, very tactical HR. The processes in general there have been a bit more manual and less sophisticated. However, this is most definitely changing. Chile is evolving and is today one of South America's most stable and prosperous nations. It's viewed particularly as business friendly, with a comparative lack of corruption and socio-economic instability. Now, aggressive efforts are being made in the areas of regulatory and compliance fronts, which will hopefully sort of ensure and cement Chile's place as a destination of choice for many corporates moving forward. And so we do expect to see rapid progress in the Chilean HR scene moving forward. So just looking at that in conclusion then, many HR leaders in Latin America have become economic migrants and really subject to economic performance from their countries. So as multinationals have shifted, we've certainly seen this, have shifted their regional HR head roles and key HR leaders to countries which are more stable and better performing economically. So with that constant move of the top talent, it's been very difficult to develop a robust HR function in one location. And that really is then looking at the true sort of complete, if you like, HR professional that's not only strong in talent, development, learning, leadership, but also is very commercial and has an appreciation and a good depth of compensation, benefits, employee relations, labor relations. It's still very difficult to find that complete HR professional in Latin America. But that is changing, and we do expect to see that evolve. I'm just going to hand over then to my colleague Tim, who's going to be discussing a bit more around the COEs.
Thank you, Alan. Talent acquisition really is an area of opportunity and one that we have already seen signs of organisations prioritising. The function tends to be oriented around processes and metrics. For example, a heavy focus on areas including identifying where there are talent gaps and understanding workforce diversity. Employer branding and the overall tactical approach in talent acquisition has meant that there is a strong reliance on search firms. But we really do see a great opportunity for talent acquisition in the region to have more impact and longer term more importance in terms of talent retention issues, and thus having more of a strategic impact on the business. Social media and internet access are still limited in some countries, and it's therefore difficult for employees to reach prospective employees directly. Total rewards is always an interesting and complex area in terms of finding great talent. It's also like talent acquisition in some cases, expertise which has great potential, and in terms of moving forward in LatAm. With almost all multinational corporations that we've spoken to reviewing their rewards approaches, this must be an area that can be leveraged in terms of increasing retention, talent engagement, and at the same time giving rewards professionals a real opportunity to further develop their strategic and commercial exposure and capabilities. Talent for rewards people across LatAm is very thin due to this structure, and it's generally not seen as an attractive area of HR to step into, as it may be in other regions. Similarly, talent management has significant opportunities in terms of direct business impact and has been somewhat challenging given the economic scenarios of recent years. But again, we see a more progressive talent, perhaps even OD and transformation agenda in some organizations, crystal balls, which will mean that the strong talent-focused people in LatAm, possibly that have been HR generalists or HR leads in the past, will have more of an opportunity to specialize. As economies improve, we expect this situation to rapidly evolve and anticipate that talent management professionals will be in high demand and in very short supply. As economies improve, we expect this situation to rapidly evolve and anticipate that talent management professionals will be in high demand and in very short supply. I'm going to hand back to Stephanie, who's going to summarize for us. Thanks, Stephanie.
Thank you, Tim. To summarize, firstly, we're seeing countries polarizing. Those that want to do business globally and those which remain inward-looking and preoccupied with issues going on within their own shores. We're also seeing a strong focus in some countries on improving the application of employment laws and driving compliance. Secondly, multinationals are also currently polarized. Those with a headquarters in the United States or Europe, and those that are committed to hubbing the Latin America region within the region itself. We believe that attraction and retention issues are expected to become even more pronounced as the region recovers. Leading multinationals are working hard on balancing how they manage costs versus positioning for growth when economies recover. We're seeing that talent management practices are set to change rapidly. We believe that talent management is going to become much more sophisticated quickly as economies recover. We see talent acquisition and total rewards as being major areas of opportunities for multinationals to explore within the region. And finally, we're anticipating chronic shortages of specialist skills generally within the HR profession.
That brings to a close our spotlight on LatAm HR trends. We hope you've enjoyed hearing more about the region. Our last Spotlight presentation is also available on our website and focused on Eastern Europe HR and the hottest topics for HR leaders. Thanks for listening, and we hope you enjoyed the presentation.
For more information, visit www.ChapmanCG.com.